Now we'll go through an example of using both large-scale and small-scale methods to analyze the use of a system. This will be a case study of a system we built at Motorola Labs a number of years ago called the Health Mashup System. And the idea is this was a service that found significant correlations between different aspects of your well-being and your context over time. So it could tell you things like, on Thursdays you gain weight, or on days when it's cloudy outside you don't walk as much on days when it's sunny outside. And this is something that we deployed for 90 days with 60 participants and had large use of instrumentation as well as diaries and interviews to help understand how those people were using the system over time. So here's just a little bit on how the system looked. We used a Fitbit sensor to capture people's daily step count and their sleep information. We had a Wi-Fi scale that people could capture their weight every day. And then on the mobile phone, we captured a variety of different contexts: their location, free and busy data from their calendar, and the weather at their location. And we had very easy ways for people to manually log their food, their mood, and any pain that they were in. And then we had a little widget on the home screen of the phone and later a full application that showed in natural language just these statistically significant things about yourself. You know, you might walk farther on weekends versus weekdays, or lose weight on days when you have more scheduled time, or not sleep as well on days before you have a lot of meetings in the morning. And then we wanted just to surface those things for you to reflect on. Here's just what the mobile interface looked like. We showed a variety of these different observations that we were able to collect about your well-being, and then you could dive into specific aspects, like look at what's affecting your mood or what's affecting your weight. And we had very simple ways to log your mood or log your food over time. So we had a lot of research questions. We built this system, and we wanted to know how people used it. We wanted to know, will people log things like their food and their mood? We had these reminders that showed up in the system, and we wanted to know, is that enough to get someone to log food and mood every day? We wanted to know if these observations that we created about people's lives stayed statistically significant over time. And that's something we could only learn if we had a lot of users using this for months at a time to see if those observations stayed significant. And we wanted to understand how people use this in their daily life. What did these observations mean to them? Were they able to understand them? Were they able to make behavior changes based on them? And did those behavior changes last? And then finally, we were interested, would people engage with this service over time? Would they keep using it from day to day to day over many months? And so we set out with those research questions and designed a study that would help get us answers to those. So both qualitatively, how are they using it? What behavior changes are they making? Can they understand the data? And quantitatively, how are they interacting with the system? How significant are those observations over time? So we had 60 people use the system for 90 days. And a wide range of ages, occupations, educational backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, to try to get as diverse a set of the American population as we could. We gave them the Fitbit and the scale for participating in the study, and we had no incentives to use the application. So we weren't paying them to use the system. We told them, you know, as long as you participate in our interviews, you get to keep the devices. And that'll be your incentive for participating in the study. And that's really important, because if you're paying someone to use your app, they'll use your app in a very different way than they might if they just downloaded it from an application store. So we had a pre-study interview, we set up the devices in their home, and then we had an online questionnaire after the third week of the study with some open-ended questions and a final interview at the end. And we also had them call into a voicemail number or send us an email anytime that they learned something new about themselves from using the system. So we were able to see how they were able to reflect on their well-being and how the information helped them learn new things about their own well-being. The app was instrumented. We captured every click in the mobile application with a user ID, a timestamp, and then what screen they were looking at, what was visible at the time, so we could go back and analyze that later. And we had a database on the server that kept track of everything that people logged, as well as every observation that was created for them over the 90 days. So we could see how those observations stayed statistically significant or didn't stay statistically significant over time. And that's important if you're logging things, to keep a history and not just delete things that are old, because you might want to go back and look at that history later, as we did with this. So we had some really interesting quantitative findings. We saw that people were really highly engaged with the app. They used it on average 6.5 times a day, looking at different screens, looking at different features of the application. We saw that they were logging food about 60% of the time over 90 days, which was really, really high for a food logging system and much higher than any of our partners working on this study with us had ever really seen before. And we saw that there were changes in well-being. Many of our users who needed to lose weight were losing weight, an average of 5 pounds, which is fairly significant for just a technology-based solution without any coaching from health professionals. So this is a graph of the overall engagement with the system. Each column is a particular user, and time goes from the top down. So you can see how people used the application over time, and you can see most of our users were extremely engaged with the system almost every day. We had a few who dropped out towards the start and just, the system wasn't that useful for them and they stopped using it. But most of the users stuck with it, and they stuck with it almost every day for the full 90 days, which was a really high level of engagement. We weren't expecting this kind of engagement. So being able to produce a graph like this from the instrumentation was really, really powerful with the partners we were working with in showing that we were really onto something that people continued to use. We then broke that down by feature. So this graph here will show you how they used each feature of the application. You can see how a lot of them were logging food and mood quite regularly. They were looking at their observations. They were looking at particular sensor details and really trying to dive into the details of their own well-being to understand themselves better. And you can see there's different classes of users. There's people who, were looking at their observations every single day. There's people who might check in once or twice a week. Producing graphs like this really helps us understand quantitatively how people are using the system. And then interviews could help us understand, for the people who use it every day, what are you looking at? Why are you going into it? To the people who look at it once a week, ask the same questions and see if it's meeting their needs just in very different ways. We were able to produce graphs like this, looking at usage on different days of the week and seeing what features people were engaging with at different days of the week or even different hours of the day. And that just helped us see how this application was fitting into their lives. And we saw that the usage was quite high across different days of the week. We were able to look at what data people provided to the system. How many days did they step on the scale? How many days did they use their pedometer? How many days did they log their food or their mood over the 90 days of the study? And then we were able to look at distributions of that. So is it really kind of bimodal, where a bunch of people aren't really doing it and a bunch of people are doing it every day? You could see that with calendar, for example, in this plot, where some people set up their calendar to automatically report every day their free busy hours. Some people didn't use the mobile phone calendar at all, so they have no data there. And so we could see by producing graphs like this that we really did have two types of users when it came to calendar data. And we were really able to dig into that data much more deeply. We were able to look at the number of data points we had for correlations between different types of sensors to see if we really did have enough data to make these statistically significant observations for people. And then we were able to look at the observations that were actually created. This plot shows the different strengths of the correlations. So you can look at one of the sensors from the columns and one of the sensors from the rows. For example, you can look at step count and calendar here, and you can see that for some people, they walked more on days when they had more calendar items in their calendar. And you can see some people walked less on days when they had more calendar items in their calendars. So what this really shows is for almost every combination of sensors and context, people were very individually different. And this points to the need for having a very individual solution like this that tells you individually what's statistically significant about your life, instead of just trying to come up with some generalisms over the population. that people really are individually unique, and we were able to see that from running this study and looking at that particular graph. In addition to the quantitative analysis, we also did a lot of qualitative analysis. You can see a picture here of our grounded theory affinity. We had over 1,800 notes in the affinity. So these are individual quotes from our participants that were relevant to our research questions. And so we got 5 of us in Atlanta going through all of this data, trying to find the patterns and the themes that arose. And some of those themes that came out, we saw that people use the system to build an awareness of themselves, to really understand that, on days when they don't sleep as much, they're not as happy, or they feel less motivated, that they really need to sleep to lead a healthier life. People were able to see that, for example, if they were in chronic pain, some of them, when they walked more and they were more active, they were actually in less pain. And that was counterintuitive to them, and so they just started walking more and trying to be more active, and that helped reduce their pain over time. So seeing those observations that came up for them, they were able to make behavior changes, be more aware of their life, be more aware of those patterns. And so the behavior changes that they made were very targeted. If the system said that you walk less on Wednesdays, well then next Wednesday they'd think about walking more. And they'd think about ways that they could make changes to increase their activity level or do things that overall made them more healthy in their daily lives. And so the main findings were that providing these statistically significant long-term trends in their well-being data really allowed for easy comprehension of the information about their daily lives. This is complex statistical data, and we just boiled it down to a sentence. And so people who just had a high school education, who had never taken a statistics class, were able to understand these sentences. They were able to understand complex statistical things about their lives, which was really exciting to us. We saw that seeing these items led to introspection about people's lives, led to the ability to create focused behavior change that would improve their well-being overall. And we saw that these simple silent notifications could really help people to remember to log, to encourage them to log their food or their mood every day. And just a notification can be a great way to drive someone into a new mobile experience. So overall, this shows us that field studies are really the best way to learn about use and context. And when we can combine large-scale quantitative methods with smaller-scale qualitative methods, we can really understand both how people are using something and why, when, and where they're using it, which is extremely important.